Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. This is day 4 of my attempt at 5 days, 5 VRs. I filmed the first few videos without acknowledging that I was doing 5 days, 5 VRs because I wasn't confident that I would actually get 5 filmed. But I'm going to acknowledge it now on day 4, crossing my fingers that means that I will in fact make it to 5 days and film the 5th video. You know, I've had these tags piling up for a while and I wanted to push myself to make some VRs, so this has been the way of doing that. Today's VR is to the tag Halloween Countdown, or Decks for Witchy Desires, and this was started by Auntie Kay's Tarot, and I'll link her video below. This is a tag all about looking forward to spooky season, looking forward to Halloween, looking forward to October. I will acknowledge that I am like clinging to the last days of summer, for dear life. I love the summer and I love the warm weather. So as much as I do enjoy Halloween, I'm also not in any rush to get there. But this is a fun tag and I wanted to make a VR. I have tried in making my choices for a deck for each prompt to stick with decks that feel at least a little bit autumnal, or decks that I would use in the time of year of the autumn. I've had a bit of a struggle with this tag, actually. I really like the prompt. However, I don't tend to be attracted to decks that are very, very seasonally specific. Like, I know that there are Halloween themed decks. I don't have any of them. I don't have any holiday themed decks or day themed decks at all. So I was, pressed to think broadly here, which I've had a good time and I've got a good stack of decks to share, I think. So I will timestamp the prompts below. I look forward to seeing other folks' VRs as well. I know that many folks who are tarot enthusiasts enjoy Halloween time or enjoy Samhain time. So I'm sure that folks will have no problem picking decks for this. So the first prompt is my familiar deck. And I chose to think about this in terms of animals and the idea of familiar. So I chose the Page of Cats tarot, that's the back, by Tina of Queen of Wands, who's also the creator of the Tarot of Architectural Objects and Naturescapes Tarot. And cats are very much familiars and familiar to me, living with 2 of them. And I love that this deck is photographic because it's cats doing things that cats do. And I don't have any other deck in my collection like that. So I enjoy this deck. And this is a deck that I would certainly use year-round. I think it's beautiful, and of course, being a cat person, it's a deck that I'm going to adore. This deck makes me happy. But this is the first place that my mind went when I thought of familiar and thought of familiars. So that was a quick easy choice for me. The Page of Cats tarot as my familiar deck. And I keep my Page of Cats tarot. It's the only deck that I have one of these for in a knitted tarot bag. I figured that the cats would appreciate that. The next prompt is the Jack-o'-lantern deck, a deck that is eerily or creatively illuminating. And for that, I chose Nocturna Oracle by Megan Weirweden. This is the same creator who made the Anima Mundi tarot. And this one is a deck that features plants. Oh, I have some reversals in here. That's a bit weird. This is a deck that features animals and plants that are associated with nighttime or that are active at night. Some weather phenomena like fog, And so thinking about creatively illuminating deck made me think of the way that these beings are illuminated on the black background of these cards. So thinking in a kind of aesthetic terms about a creatively illuminating deck. It's also a deck that allows me to get creative in my interpretation, since there aren't any keywords or anything to incline a reading one way or the other. Some of the things that are depicted I have, personal associations for, so I'm free to use those. There is a guidebook, so you also have that to consult. But this one definitely feels eerily illuminating to me. So that is the Nocturna Oracle, that's the back, by Megan Weirweden as creatively or eerily illuminating. The next deck is my Broom deck, a deck that helps me fly or get where I'm going. So with this one, I thought about a deck that is efficient for me to interpret and that I can get a message from, in a quite quick, kind of almost instantaneous looking way. And for that, I chose the Nature Magic Oracle, and this is by Kristen of Over the Moon Academy, who's created so many wonderful decks, several of which I have and love. And this deck includes black and white pictures of plant matter for the most part, and a single keyword. And this deck pairs well with basically every other deck that I have, and it lends always clarity to any reading. I've done readings with this deck alone before, and this is also works well for me. And I find that these keywords are just well chosen. They go with the imagery well. And, for a deck that helps me get where I'm going in a reading, where I'm going is getting to the message or getting to the, the answer that the reading is providing for whatever question that I asked. And this deck is a deck that gets me there in a clear, concise way. And this is another, I would use this deck, and I do use this deck year round. If it inclines seasonal, it is definitely kind of autumn, winter for me, but it goes with every other deck, so you can use it anytime. So that is my Broom deck, the deck that helps me fly and get where I'm going. The Nature Magic Oracle by Kristen of Over the Moon Academy. I will put that back in its bag. The next prompt is Cleans Out the Cobwebs deck. And I wasn't sure what to pick for this at first, but I saw that Auntie Kay in her original video picked the Tarot Archetypal as a deck that really gets her thinking. It's almost a little bit more minimalist deck in some ways. And so I kind of went along that line of thinking for my choice as well, for Cleans Out the Cobwebs deck. And so for that, I chose the Soul Cards Tarot. This is the back. There are a couple of versions of this. I think there's a different color version of this deck. But this deck is to me sigils. And so, it's not a deck with a lot of visual representations, but they are there. You kind of have to search for the symbols inside of these depictions. And I really like this. It's all metallic. So this is a really good candlelight reading deck. And it is definitely one that gets me thinking, for sure. It's also one that if I'm in a bit of a rut in terms of like magical workings or things like that, this one can kind of get me out of that. I've used this deck, you know, in that kind of context, not just for doing readings. It's a hard deck to get the camera to show in a good way. I could imagine getting a tattoo of one of these, actually. So this is a deck that cleans out the cobwebs, gets my mind working and activated, and might get me back at my magic working space if I haven't been there for a while as well. And that one I'll show the boxes is the Soul Cards Tarot deck. The next prompt, I'm reading off of a sheet, obviously. The next prompt is the Cauldron deck, a deck that helps stir up magic. And the Soul Cards Tarot could have been that stir up the magic deck as well, potentially, but 2 prompts, need to pick something else. So I chose the Memento Mori, Lenormand, and Oracle deck by Claire Goodchild of Black and the Moon. She's created a number of different decks. I have her Compendium of Constellations as well, and Arcana of Astrology, which I think is mass market now. It has these kind of I hope you can tell this is not because I've been really rough on the card. They're kind of aged looking on the back, which is pretty cool. And this deck definitely feels like a magical workings deck to me, in terms of the kind of symbols that are represented in the deck. There's a lot of skeletons. Here the cat is a skeleton. There are a lot of representations of magical tools in here, offerings. All kinds of things in this deck. Sextant. Gloves. Harp. There were even a few things in this deck that when I got it, I had to like look up what they were because I wasn't sure. Watch. A lock. A knife. But some of these are things that I have on my own magical working table. Some of them are things that I have had on that table at different times. So in terms of a deck that helps stir up the magic, remedy, this deck came to mind. So that is the Memento Mori Oracle by Claire Goodchild of Black and the Moon. I'll put the decks away tidy later. Okay. The next one is the Honoring or Remembrance or Quiet deck. And this one, I definitely had probably a couple that I could choose for that. And this is a deck that is pretty new to me, that I'm going to be working with in some way over the coming year in a kind of deliberate way. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like yet, but I will share that with you. And that deck is the Wisdom of the Kayak Oracle by Jane Brideson. And this one focuses on the kayak, who is, or who are, there are different ones in different regions. A kind of, some say goddess, but many would say something more like a land spirit or something like this, who is associated with wintertime and ancestors and is ancient, who shapes the landscape, and created the world. And in terms of thinking about and exploring the parts of my ancestry that are Scottish and from that kind of region of the world. This is a deck that really appealed to me, and I was interested in a deck that has really like crone wisdom feeling, and this deck does that as well. And when I saw this deck, when I saw the paintings, I was just really in awe of this deck. And so as a deck that, you know, the prompt is honoring and remembrance and quiet, you know, my mind went to ancestors and history. And so this deck feels like that deck to me, very much so. There are also, you know, one card in particular in this deck, I'm not going to try to find it now, that reminds me a lot of one of my grandmothers. And so that's the other reason that this deck, you know, both appealed to me and came to mind for this prompt. So that is Wisdom of the Kayak Oracle by Jane Brideson as my honoring, remembrance, and quiet deck. Prompt number 7, flat out witchy or Halloweeny deck. This is the one where I was like, I don't know if I have anything like this, because, you know, I know there's like a Halloween Oracle and decks like that. There's certainly plenty of witch themed tarot decks, and I'm like going through my collection in my head, like, do I have anything that is flat out witchy or Halloweeny at all? And I have one deck with witch in the title. I do. So that's what I chose for this one. The Literary Witches Oracle 70 card deck and guidebook. And I like this deck a lot because it makes me fondly remember the reading group that Kelly Bear and Becca did for the authors featured in this deck. I miss that reading group. I think I read maybe 10 out of 12 of the books that were picked for that reading group. One of them I'd already read before, so I didn't reread it again. Maybe I even read 11. I stuck to that one. I really enjoyed that. So this deck is split into 2 categories. Some of them are these author cards. And so for the reading group, Kelly and Becca would pick one, and then that would be the author that would be read for the coming month. And I got to encounter some new authors. If a deck has an Octavia Butler card, I'm going to buy it also. We read Octavia Butler as one of our picks, actually. We read Farrah Fawcett as well. And Zora Neale Hurston. And we didn't read Audre Lorde, I don't think, but I've read Audre Lorde before. So there's these author cards, which is the smaller of the 2 groups of cards in this deck. And then the rest of the cards are these symbol cards. And I like reading with this part of the deck. I have never tried to do a reading really with the author cards. They have keywords. You certainly could. I haven't read every author in the deck. Maybe most. But I love these cards. These are great. And definitely, I would say, witchy. So this is the most flat out witchy that I have in my collection, is the Literary Witches. A deck that I quite enjoy, and I got there's a bigger book that goes with it. That comes separately, but is also Literary Witches, and goes beyond what the guidebook that comes in the deck did, and I quite like that as well. So, flat out witchy, Literary Witches. Next up, the Sweet Treat deck. I do like a sweet treat. I really like dark chocolate is the go-to for sure. But I like candy and things like that. I always give it out to the children on Halloween, and then if there's leftovers, you know, if we accidentally buy 3 times as much as we need, it's a thing that happens. So my sweet treat deck, I went right back to cats, and I picked Mini Cherokee Gatti by Osvaldo Menegazzi. And this is a sweet treat deck to me, even though it doesn't have a sweet treat palette, like it's not brightly colored, but it's a sweet treat deck to me because it's tiny and has adorable, sweet cats, sometimes in costumes, which is perfect for Halloween. Look at that cat's face. I actually have a book called Hats for Cats, or Cats in Hats, or something like this, and it's knitting patterns for hats in cat's eyes, and this deck makes me think of that. Daryl's not wearing a hat anytime soon. He would probably try to eat it, but what is sweeter than this? I love this one too. So that is Mini Cherokee Gatti. Cute, sweet, tiny, adorable, sweet treat deck. Next up is the Ugly Cozy Sweater deck. I don't know if I have a deck that I would describe as ugly. I don't know about that. But I know that I have a deck that feels cozy to me, that I know other people think is ugly, or some other people think is ugly, and that's the Deviant Moon Tarot. I know that this is a deck that is not for everyone, and for some folks it's very off-putting. I edged mine in black Sharpie. These are some of my favorite deck backs, actually. I like how stark they are. I know that there are people for whom this is very ugly. I don't think this is ugly. I think that this is a pretty cool deck. And I also think, in terms of the Ugly Cozy Sweater, this deck reads really well and is familiar, and so could be cozy in that sense. I also think that, much like an ugly sweater does, or ugly sweater parties, you know, these kind of things, this deck has such a sense of humor. You know, I have heard people talk about this as kind of, this is like a so-called shadow deck, or it's a really confronting and difficult deck. I think this deck is hilarious and cheeky. I think that this deck really, you know, in its representations, like, it doesn't take itself too seriously. I can see a real sense of humor in this artwork. And so, for that reason, this deck can be like an ugly, cozy sweater to me. I wasn't sure if I would be into this deck when I got it. I wasn't sure if it would feel like too themed, almost. But for me, it doesn't. I think that this deck is a great reader, and I really like it. So that is my Ugly Cozy Sweater deck, Deviant Moon. Worth a Cackle deck is the next prompt. And for Worth a Cackle, which is a good prompt, let me say, I chose L'Oracle des Vieilles Dames, the Oracle of Old Ladies. And when I think of, you know, witch cackling, these old ladies, who are amazing, good lovers, come to mind. This is another deck that I think has a real sense of humor to it that I appreciate, while also being one that I can read within, you know, a serious context. Numéro 12, the new star. I love these old ladies. And so for Worth a Cackle, they immediately came to mind. I feel like this deck really celebrates old ladies in ways that are rare and that I really appreciate. As US is playing, like tickling the feet of someone. Like, how wonderful is this deck? I love this deck. So that is my Worth a Cackle deck, L'Oracle des Vieilles Dames, the Oracle of Old Ladies by Athénée Fontrevel. Beautiful. Next up, the Confront Fear deck. This is mostly inspired by the guidebook more than the deck itself. And the Confront Fear deck that I chose is the Marigold Tarot, which is a great reading deck. I have had this deck for a long time. I've mentioned before I got to buy it from the creator at an art show, which I think makes it have a little bit of extra special to me. And the deck has a lot of skulls and skeletons in it. But in the guidebook at the beginning, when she's talking about the skeletons and the different symbols that recur throughout the deck, Amrit Brar, the creator, is she writes about how, you know, a skeleton has done, you know, all the things that humans do, right? And these skeletons, you know, don't have flesh on them, but they have lived and loved and adventured and done, you know, all of these things by virtue of being part of human, right? And talks about, you know, not needing to fear this, you know, part of the human body that we don't generally see in this form. And I really like the way that she talks about that. And so that made me think of this deck as a confronting fear deck. I can't say that I have a fear or discomfort of skeletons or this kind of imagery at all. Like, I don't experience this as a fearful deck in any way that I need to overcome a discomfort with. But I appreciate that this deck has that kind of spirit built into the intention of the creation of the deck. So that is why I picked Marigold Tarot as a confront fear deck. 2 prompts left. The second last prompt is the Harvest deck, and that is a deck that you saved up for. And so there's a few, and there's definitely a few in my collection that I could, you know, put with that, but sticking to one that feels like an autumnal kind of deck for me, I would say the one that I saved up for would be the Tildwick Tarot. This is the 2nd edition. And I would say that I saved up for this one because I missed out on it when it was first available. The creator passed away in 2018. There's a card here about him, Neil Lovell. And his brother brought this deck back into production for another print run. And when it was announced that that would be happening, I knew that I would like to have this deck. So, you know, thinking about saving up for it, and it was definitely on the expensive end for me. You know, the price of the deck was in pounds sterling, and that means, you know, both a steep exchange rate and also international shipping, which made it expensive. But since I had been kind of kicking myself for missing it, because I really like kind of what I call like place-based decks that represent spaces or locations, whether that's landscape or whether that's more interior like this. I really like decks that are like that. And so I knew that it was a deck that I wanted to get. I knew that it would be expensive. And I knew that I was going to buy it if I could. So that is my Harvest deck, a deck that I saved up for. And I'm happy that I did. because I think that it is beautiful and much more beautiful in person than the photos do. And I think that photos of it look good, but in person it looks better. Now the last one, the last prompt that I've included here is Colourful Foliage, a landscape deck with colorful foliage. And so for that one, I'm including the Majestic Earth Tarot by J.D. Hildegard Hinkle. Again, I have quite a few decks in my collection for this prompt, so I had a couple of choices to make. But I looked at a couple to kind of compare and see which one that I would like to pick. That's the back. And I saw quite a bit of fall foliage in this one. Particularly in the trees suit, which is the fire suit, or wands, but not exclusively. There's a lot of tree scenes in this deck. And this is for me a year-round reading deck, but it definitely fits this prompt of colorful foliage for, you know, pretty obvious reasons. And so that's why I've chosen it as the Colorful Foliage deck, the Majestic Earth Tarot. That is the last prompt, and so that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Antiques Tarot, for creating this fun tag to help us look forward to October. I don't want summer to be over, but I do like autumn as well. So happy to think in that spirit. Thank you so much for watching. I wish everybody a great day, and I'll see you all soon.